Russia is no longer interested in the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Donetsk and Luhansk regions, nor is it interested in signing a peace agreement. Such a wild statement was made an hour ago by the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. He stated that, supposedly, judging by the rapid advance of the armed forces of the Russian Federation along the front line, Russia's interest in the withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from the territories of Donbas they occupy is close to zero. Therefore, according to him, it is better for Russians to continue the war in order to fully capture the Donetsk region. And Putin stated that Russians would be happier with such a scenario than with signing a peace agreement, which means that Putin effectively rejected a peaceful settlement on the eve of the meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the American president's residence. Today, Putin allegedly visited one of the Russian army's command posts, where he was reportedly informed about the alleged capture of Huliai in the Zaporizhzhia region and Mirnohrad in the Donetsk region. The Russians no longer mention Kupiansk. In addition, Putin claimed that the West had suggested Ukraine agree to Russia's demands, saying those were very favorable conditions for Ukraine, but now it's supposedly too late. And against this backdrop, the Institute for the Study of War stated that Putin sees Belarus as a staging ground for attacks and military scenarios. Despite the fact that there are fewer and fewer people in Putin's inner circle who support continuing the war. So, in this episode, let's break down the latest statement from the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and how it relates to tomorrow's talks between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and don't forget to leave a comment under this episode. This really helps a lot in promoting the episodes on YouTube. I will be grateful to you for this. And subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in.
Comrade Nikolai Vladimirovich, United Deputy, Kuboysk will follow the special military operation plan under General Staff direction. Let's go.
I know you have something to report, something to please us with. Our citizens.
So, the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin appeared again today in military uniform at one of the command posts of the occupying Russian army to once again hear about the alleged capture of more Ukrainian cities. It's funny how Russian propagandists are already insisting that this post where Putin was is, quote, directly in the special military operations zone, although of course there is no evidence of this. Putin was told about the reported capture of Huliai in Zaporizhzhia and Mirnohrad in Donetsk. And it's important to note that at the moment there are no comments on this topic from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. But I would like to remind you that earlier, the Armed Forces of Ukraine pushed the Russians out of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. But of course no one reported this to Putin. Overall, the Russians are now pretending. Kupiansk? What do you mean Kupiansk? Did we ever say that we captured it? And here it's important to pay attention to why Putin has appeared in military uniform again, right now. It's very simple. The Kremlin is trying to show Donald Trump that just a little more time, literally a couple of weeks, and Russia will capture all of Ukraine. That's why it would be better for Trump to put pressure on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky so that he accepts absolutely all of Moscow's conditions. Let me remind you that in the spring of this year, unfortunately, Putin managed to convince Donald Trump that the Russians would really capture all of Donbas during the summer. Trump stalled the negotiation process then. As you remember, unfortunately, he withdrew the transfer of intelligence data to the Ukrainian army and so on. During that time, the Ukrainian armed forces had to withdraw from the Kursk region. And Trump returned to this issue only in August. Putin is now trying to show Trump that Ukraine should be forced to surrender, or Russia will take more territory by force. So Putin's goal now is to show as forcefully as possible, look, if there's no peace agreement, we don't care about this agreement at all, we don't need it. Our pace of advance is supposedly so furious that basically, well, there won't be a peace agreement. So Russia could, I don't know, literally capture all of Ukraine in just 3 weeks. That's the message Putin is trying to push to Trump right before his meeting with Zelensky. Let me remind you, Zelensky said he'd try to negotiate with Trump for more favorable territory positions for Ukraine. Ukraine agrees to make part of Donbas a demilitarized free economic zone, but if Ukraine withdraws its troops from Donbas, then the Russians are obligated to do exactly the same, to the same distance deep into the occupied territories. And according to insider information, Trump's team also agrees with this scenario. They say, listen, then Putin will get what he wants, and Ukraine will get a buffer security zone. They say troops should be equally withdrawn from the current line. And that's exactly why Putin decided to raise the bar today. At a meeting with Russian generals, Putin was told, and I quote, "Judging by the pace of advancement of the armed forces of the Russian Federation along the front line, Russia's interest in withdrawing the Ukrainian armed forces from the territories they occupy in Donbas is close to zero." And so on. Putin says that if the Kyiv authorities do not want to resolve the issue peacefully, Russia will accomplish all its objectives during the special military operation by military means. Well, that was kind of a hint that Kyiv doesn't have time to think things over. Moreover, Putin stated that even in the West, they supposedly understand that today Kyiv has the opportunity to exit the conflict with dignity, but according to Putin, Kyiv is in no hurry to take advantage of this opportunity. Please forgive me, but I have to quote the bold dictator Putin, quote, "There are also smart people in the West who are advising the Kyiv authorities to accept decent terms for ending the conflict, and they are offering good basic conditions to ensure Ukraine's security. For the long-term historical perspective, these are the conditions for restoring relations with the Russian Federation and rebuilding Ukraine's economy. Unfortunately, even today, the leaders of the Kyiv regime are still not seeking a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Judging by the pace we observe on the line of contact, our interest in the withdrawal of Ukrainian military formations from the territories they currently occupy is practically zero." And here I'll make a remark right away. I don't understand what kind of restoration of relations with the unwashed Russians Putin is talking about here. That's a complete mystery to me. So basically, Putin is trying to sabotage the very subject of the negotiations between Trump and Zelensky, but in reality, it's just a bluff. Putin claims that supposedly he's no longer interested in having the Ukrainian armed forces simply withdraw from Donbas. He claims Russian troops will likely seize the remaining territories by force within weeks. But if, according to Putin's logic, the Russians are advancing at such a furious pace, then why, after 11 years of war, have the unwashed wild Russians still not managed to occupy these territories? Subtitles, what happened? Well, they don't have enough strength to do it, but for Trump, the image of breakthroughs and Putin in uniform, well, quite convincing. And I'm sure that after seeing Vladimir Putin's show, after calling Putin, tomorrow Trump will put pressure on Zelensky. That's what this whole performance was staged for, and also today's show by Putin. This is also a response to Trump, who said that the Russian economy is in terrible decline. Like, look, we can keep fighting for years. By the way, at the beginning of December, the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation, these are not my data, not Western, but Russian data. They reported an increase in the budget deficit for January-November 2025 to 4.3 trillion rubles, which is 12 times more than for the same period in the previous year, 2024. Russians are really struggling with their economy. But Putin is showing Trump that he was wrong once again, and that Russia is actually ready to keep fighting. And in addition, on Saturday night, Russian troops also delivered a powerful strike on Kyiv. That is, just a few hours after the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced a planned Sunday meeting with President of the United States, Donald Trump, in Florida, the Russians struck Kyiv. According to eyewitnesses, the sky over the Ukrainian capital was torn apart by explosions. These attack drones were circling over the city, and the air raid siren, well, basically sounded all night. As a result of the attack, at least 8 people were injured. Cruise and ballistic missiles hit residential buildings, fires broke out in a car repair shop and apartment buildings. Everything was aimed specifically at the houses. Elderly people were forced to evacuate from a nursing home in Kyiv while the fire was spreading through the building. Plus, a student dormitory was also hit. In general, the Russians deliberately decided to carry out such terror, and all of this is to show Trump an image that Russia will not make any concessions. In addition, Russia is now raising the stakes even higher. The Washington Institute for the Study of War reports that Belarus remains a staging ground for Russian strikes on Ukraine and possible NATO attacks. This is confirmed by recent drone strikes on the railway infrastructure in the western regions of Ukraine. And now I will quote the analysts. Russia is actively developing military infrastructure on the territory of Belarus, using it to support aggression against Ukraine and to create conditions for possible future military scenarios against NATO. According to the latest data, Russian Shahed drones are attacking railway facilities in western Ukraine. The launch is carried out from the Belarusian direction in order to bypass Ukrainian drone interception systems. And now analysts believe that Russian drone operators are located on the territory of Belarus using first-person view control to attack moving targets. But analysts add that Moscow plans to further develop military infrastructure in Belarus, providing support for the war against Ukraine and creating conditions for strikes against NATO countries. In general, Putin put on a real show today for just one audience member for Donald Trump. I'll leave it at that, friends. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it says support the channel Alexei Pichi. Choose any support format that's convenient for you, and I'll be grateful for any donation you make. Also, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, and don't forget to like the video. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.